Let's talk about property ownership now, and we are going to have that conversation with Mi Vida Homes. Yeah, it's a big one, isn't it?
It is.
Hey. And as we continue thinking about having the conversations and what we're going to do and what we're going to discuss, Samuel Kariuki is the Chief Executive Officer of Mi Vida, and he's our guest. Good morning, Samuel.
Good morning. How are you?
Very well. Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation. Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Thank you.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
This man called Mr. C.T. Muga has the day's proverb. Every day he gives us a proverb from a different, every week proverbs from a different country. Mm-hmm. These week's proverbs are from Zambia. And you said the president of Zambia is?
Well, he has a rather lengthy name.
Hakainde
Hichilema.
Thank you very much.
Hichilema.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, since you're going to mention what well mentioned is VP, Mutale Nalumango.
Mutale Nalumango.
That's his VP.
All right. Okay.
You cannot accuse them of not having African-sounding names.
Mm-mm.
No. Don't start a fight just because your companion is strong.
Don't start a fight just because your companion is strong.
Yes.
Samuel,
Yes.
when you hear that proverb, does it resonate with you?
Well, the companion might walk away.
I do.
And you'll have to do the fight. You'll have to fight on your own.
What do you think the Zambians are saying? Beyond that, just the obvious literal meaning.
Yeah. I don't know. Peace? Well, it has nothing to do with property for sure.
Or maybe it does.
Maybe it does.
Or maybe it does. But it's probably just that. Don't just start a fight for whatever reason. I guess one would say my companion looks like he can fight, so I feel secure to do whatever. But he may just literally walk away.
In your line of business, a companion would be, say, a financial institution. And for you, a fight may be putting up a development. So, do you start that particular fight because your companion is there, or don't you?
I do start it because Muga has some money. And if I know Muga has some money, for sure, I'll build something. Or he looks moneyed. Then I'll definitely give him a brochure. And the brochure is a fight in itself.
Bas, touche, as they say.
Kuisha. Samuel, introduce us to Mi Vida.
Thank you. So Mi Vida means, Mi Vida is a joint venture between two global corporates. First of which is Actis. Actis is a UK-based private equity fund manager. Been in Kenya for many years. I would bet every one of you, every listener has interacted with an Actis investment one way or the other. Most likely you take coffee at Java. Java is owned by Actis. If you've been to the Garden City Mall, it's developed and owned by Actis. If you've been to Junction Mall, it was developed by Actis. We exited some time back. If you happen to be at Radisson Blue, Fairview Hotel in Upper Hill, Holiday Inn at Two Rivers, those are Actis properties. Or if you take milk, Actis is a part owner of a milk company in Kenya. So you do interact with an Actis portfolio company one way or the other. And I keep saying, if you don't do any of those, certainly you use electricity. And Kipeto Wind Power is an Actis portfolio company. So chances are then tonight you will switch on your lights. Part of that energy is coming from an Actis-owned company.
Wow.
So Actis is a major investor in Kenya, is a major investor in Africa, major investor in Asia and Latin America, emerging markets. All right. Then Shaponji Palonji is a 150-year-old
Shaponji
Palonji. It's a complicated name, but not as complicated as the Zambian names.
It competes favorably.
Shaponji Palonji. We ran a campaign to test the pronunciation of the company.
Yeah.
How did that one go?
No, not that well. Yeah. So it's a 150-year-old conglomerate based in India, one of India's biggest. 150-year-old in construction and real estate. In India, Actis and Shaponji, partner in affordable and mid-market housing. And therefore, they were seeking to replicate that in Africa, starting from Kenya.
Okay.
So Mi Vida then is, the result of that initiative by both Actis and Shaponji. And I think what it brings to Kenya is much needed institutionalization of real estate. Because real estate in Africa mostly, outside of the more developed market, has been a mom and pop kind of thing. It's you and I get an eighth of a plot, do a few flats, and that has been the primary supply.
Yeah.
So you could argue it's unregulated, doesn't meet certain standards. Largely, majority of us, even middle class, would live in, I would say, premises which are lacking in what I would call decent amenities that should be available, in for a decent living, if I put it like that. I live somewhere where I like the sun. Everybody should always be out in the sun for a few minutes. But for me to get the sun on a weekend, I have to get into the parking and sit on the cab row.
Why?
That's the only place I can.
Why?
Does this place not have windows?
No, see, you need to be outside. You need to be outside.
outdoors.
Yes, you need to be outdoors.
So the only outdoor space available for you is the parking space.
Is the
Parking
parking.
space.
Right.
And this is in a high-end neighborhood.
You're paying some
I'm
good
paying,
money.
I'm paying some good money. So that tells you, that gap in institutional quality supply of real estate that has certain basic, minimum level of decent amenities. So Mi Vida comes to solve that. And I say it's a unique proposition because, it's financial capital partnering with technical capital of these two giants. And that's Mi Vida for you.
So I hear you saying then that it's solution oriented, whereby there are issues within housing, there are issues within real estate that then you've come in to then be able to solve. What would you say are then some of these challenges that are faced by folks who are either renting or buying that you're coming in to then plug? What are some of those challenges that we face?
Okay. I think the way to look at the challenges is to look at both what we call the supply side and the demand side of the housing value chain. When you talk of supply side, it's exactly that, the supply of homes, developers acquiring land and developing homes. When you talk of the demand side, it is you and I buying a home or renting a home. On the supply side, then the question is, what's the current situation on supply, and especially of affordable, decent quality housing. I think the figures that are often quoted by both the public and private sector is we have a deficit of about 2 million units. And annualized, that is, we need a supply of 250,000 units per year to meet that deficit, which is currently growing.
In the country or in Nairobi?
Well, I would say the country, but of that, the bulk could be Nairobi, not surprisingly. Of the 250,000, the quoted supply at the moment is 50,000, of which only 1,000 would qualify as affordable. And suppose the way to look at
supply is 50 units.
The current supply is 50,000 units.
50,000 units
out
a year.
of a requirement of 250,000 units. So it shows you there is a significant supply-demand gap.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
You've said then, out of that, only 1,000 are affordable.
Would qualify as affordable.
Would qualify as
Yes.
affordable. What are the markers for this affordability that we're talking about? So that before you then...
That's a very good question. Thank you. Because, again, when you talk of affordability, one must ask, is it about affordable rental? Is it about affordable ownership? I like to think of affordable rental as a need today. If you're thinking of human needs and human wants, to me, an affordable rental, decent rental, is a need. Affordable ownership, one could say, is a want. I would want to affordably own a home, but I do need an affordable, decent home I can today rent. And I appreciate Nairobi specifically. About 90% of us are tenants, and it's going to be so for a while. So I see the need today as affordable, supply of affordable rental. I would define as, affordable rental, if I just take the government's own definition. Anybody who earns up to 150,000 shillings gross qualifies for the affordable housing program. If I earn 150K, I probably pay 45,000 or so in taxes and deductions, so I have a rough 100 to spare. We have a benchmark of 30% that says don't spend more than 30% of your net on housing, which then caps my affordable rental at 30,000. 30,000 probably your mid income or lower middle income kind of a person. It certainly does not address the social housing aspect of it, and I know they call that the hustler segment of the population. So if I earn up to 50,000 and maybe take home 45,000, I can't spend more than 15,000 on a house.
You should not.
You should not spend more than. The question today is, what decent home can I today rent at 15,000?
For a family.
For a family.
That's not a studio we are talking about.
Not a studio. This is a family. So if I'm, there are certain professions, I don't want to mention them, that earn up to that level. And yes, so if I have a wife and I have 2 children, I definitely need, and a DSQ. I probably need a 2-bedroom.
Yep.
And that might be a stretch as well, because if it's a boy and a girl, and a servant who is supporting us, and this boy and girl are about to become teenagers,
you need each of them to be in their own bedroom.
Absolutely. So for 15,000, probably you will struggle today, especially closer to CBD, to find such a home. And you could argue there's even a segment, even 50,000 and probably above, there's even a segment below that. So there's a segment you would call the social housing segment, and social housing can only be supplied by the government, can only be rental. That's not somewhere the private sector can play. So, in short, then, to answer your very good question, you have the social segment that is really a government mandate. You have this segment between 50,000 to, between 20,000 to 50,000 in need of decent affordable housing, probably can afford up to 15. Then the other group that qualifies up to 30,000 shillings. That probably meets the formal definition of affordable housing.
Everything that I've heard you say, Samuel, points to a problem.
Yes.
Because if we just go with that argument, that basic argument of don't spend more than 30% of your net income on housing, then you have moved a majority of people who live in Nairobi and they're paying rent out of this bracket. Then also we talk about the supply side, and you've said we have a deficit of about 250,000 units per year. That's new homes being constructed, getting into the market every year. We are only doing about 50,000. So we have a shortfall of 200 every year. We had an economist here, and we've had economists talking to us in the last couple of days, and they're saying, in fact, in Nairobi, what we have is an oversupply of houses.
Look at it this way. 60% of, as a direct result of that, 60% of Nairobians live in informal settlements. 60%. And even those who live in what would not be informal settlements, so permanent material, for example, privately owned, Nairobi is one gigantic, if I may say that, sprawl of unplanned developments. There's a time way back, for the younger generation, they may not know that, there's a time this musician called Coolio came to Nairobi. I think I was in high school then. And his observation of Nairobi was that Nairobi is one big slum. Oh no, he called it one big ghetto. Of course, we may have had our own feelings then, but generally, if you observe,
we'll see him when we get there.
But if you drive outside of the so-called middle class neighborhoods and see where true Nairobians live, regardless of which road you take, the reality is you see this sprawl of very unplanned. Yes, they are flats, yes, but it's a sprawl of very unplanned development. If you get into any one of them, no standard from a sizing perspective, no lighting, no infrastructure at all. So you could argue by any standard, they are also informal settlements. Yeah. And majority of Nairobians then live in those kind of environments. And I'll take one estate, take Pipeline Estate. It by our definition, it's not a slum, right?
Yeah.
It's a concrete sort of, development, 4+ floors, where some go up to 10 floors illegally. But by any definition, that cannot be formal. supply of housing. So that's where, those kind of estates is where majority of Nairobians live. If you ever drive along Thika Road, just past Garden City, and you start observing these, it's called Zimmerman, I think. Just that whole expanse of Zima, Githurai, Kahawa West, that's the character of Nairobi City generally. And when I look at that, then it's what speaks best to lack of supply of affordable housing. Ignore the social housing. Lack of social housing leads to slamification. But lack of affordable housing is then leading to this, sprawl of mom and shop unregulated flats. So I think it would be disingenuous for anyone to argue that Nairobi has an oversupply. Certainly it doesn't have. Not when it comes to definition of just basic, decent, quality housing.
Okay.
Yes.
So all of the real estate mushrooming that we've seen over the last 10 years. I mean, there was a time here we talked about the real estate, this bubble, whether it was imagined or real, that we said it was going to burst at some point, because everywhere you looked, there were, there was real estate popping up, right? So are we saying essentially, Samuel, that the houses that have come up are, number one, not affordable, number two, they are not fulfilling the need. So even if you look around and you say, well, there's an estate, there's another one, there are blocks of flats, they're empty, then there's a reason why they're empty. Are we saying then that this supposed solution that was coming in was actually not fulfilling the need that Nairobi has?
Okay, an excellent question. I think if you look at the, the way the country has developed post 2000, before 2002, there were, by modern standards, minimal development of any scale coming up. We all remember how the economic situation was pre-2003. When the government changed, and a number of economic policies were put and initiatives were put in place, there was then this very, not sudden, but, gradual but rapid emergence of a middle class. And what developers then did was to address that emerging middle class and upper middle class, and hence the significant supply of housing in Kilimani, Lavington, Kileleshwa, and such like estates. But they were addressing that middle class to the upper middle class. And yes, there was this talk of a bubble burst. I would probably see it as a trend towards saturation. Because today, if I look at the segment that I would call prime residential, there will always be pockets of demand, but one could argue it's saturated. Nobody's going to do 1,000 high-end homes today. But there will be pockets where I'm doing 100, 200 also. The middle, if I may call it that word, like that, so it's a mid-market sort of segment that will constantly have some demand to some extent, because yes, there's always a middle class that's emerging, and then there's an aspirational segment that's looking to move from one sort of standard of living to another as incomes grow. But on affordable housing, just because of the nature, the character of returns there, of course, prime residential has excellent returns, very, very high returns. There's a time Nairobi and Mombasa were deemed to have the highest returns of real estate globally because of that prime residential. And even today, Nairobi is still ranked from a return perspective a top 15 city globally from a return on prime residential. Big surprise.
Wow.
But on the affordable side, obviously the return character from an investor perspective is slightly different. And if it's not surprising, then investors at the turn of the millennium would have focused on the prime residential and the mid-market. And that meant then you didn't have significant institutional supply of affordable housing, what we'd call affordable housing, addressing these rental ranges of up to, for now, I'd probably say up to 45,000 case. So to the extent then that you're talking of this deficit of 2 million in major cities, the question of saturation for that segment, or the question of a bubble burst, to me does not arise. What you do have is a supply and demand mismatch for some of the reasons that we are discussing.
Okay.
Yes.
So if we look at this, which Mi Vida is interested in, obviously, bridging the gap between quality and affordability, why then do we not I mean, it would seem as though if you were going to go into this commercial venture of putting up housing, that you would want to then fill the need. Unless this is information that not everybody knows. Maybe those in the real estate sector do not know that the problem is lack of affordable housing in these areas. But if you did know that, then why would you not then go into whereby folks then can either buy or rent housing that is commensurate to their income?
Okay.
I am confused.
Okay. No, good observation. I would say, in the last couple of years, as the more prime residential becomes saturated, you are then seeing institutional developers getting very interested, not just in mid-market, but on the affordable housing space. And affordable housing is becoming what I would call an investment-grade asset that an institutional investor, backed by institutional capital, is looking to invest in. And hence, for example, even though we are backed by a global institution, our return or the investment return requirements from our shareholders, of course, would be expected to be on the higher side. We do see, based on the addressable market for affordable housing, and the depth of the demand, we do see it as an investment opportunity, that one can structure an investment opportunity that meets the return requirements of investors, but also addresses that need for impact. If you think about 2 million units, even if you cumulatively take what both the government and private sector are doing today, you are nowhere near addressing that. And not just in Nairobi. Think about, I drive around counties a lot, and I notice, because of devolution in the last 10 or so years, even counties are themselves, at least the major counties, becoming economic centers in their own right. And therefore, in a maybe not remote, if you drive somewhere far in northern, far in central Kenya or far in eastern Kenya, you will now see again the mushrooming of flats, meaning there's a rental demand that's now growing even in those sort of counties. And therefore, I would expect this 2 million deficit we are talking about to even grow. You have more people leaving university this year, coming to join the labor force. They will need decent housing. So it will continue.
Most of them are basically moving into the urban areas.
Most of them are moving to the urban areas. That's where the job opportunities are. So yes, to your question, there is an investment opportunity in affordable housing. And the story there is great. Not only are we talking about returns from an investor perspective, but there is an impact. There is an impact in addressing urban and social problems by we playing in the affordable housing space.
Samuel, let's take a break. When we come back, I want us to engage a little bit on this affordable housing and the affordability, because you already have put a case here that very many of the houses that we see, particularly in Nairobi, are beyond what should be affordable to a majority of people. So what is it that the industry is doing to address that? Our guest this morning is Samuel Kariuki. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Mi Vida Homes. Now, if you've been down Garden City, you've seen Mi Vida Homes, and he'll tell us exactly where. If you've been down Wayaki Way, you've also seen Mi Vida Homes. Someone will tell us exactly where and the kind of developments that they have in all these areas. Spice. Samuel Kariuki, the CEO of Mi Vida. This is a real estate development company. The big boys are in town, right? So we're talking about, two partners who are big globally active, a global public equity fund, and Shaponji Palonji, 150-year-old construction and real estate company off of India, coming together and forming Mi Vida in Kenya and developing the houses that you're developing. You talked about affordability. So what you're doing is bridging that gap, as you say, between what is quality and what is affordable. But at the same time, you've also told us, if you look at the average incomes of Kenyans and then the average amount that those average Kenyans are paying for rent, if they're in urban areas, particularly in Nairobi, they're paying above what is advisable for them to pay. So that means the issue of, even though they are able to pay this, it means that something else is being affected. So affordability is a big issue. Why are the houses that expensive in Nairobi for rent? Why is rent so high?
Okay. I think one way to look at it is what are the supply side constraints to developers. If you think of supply side, then you start with the beginning point, which is land. Is there adequate serviced land that is affordable in areas near workplaces, near the CBDs, near the urban nodes? The answer is that is one of the biggest challenges. On average, land in Nairobi is what I would call the Nairobi metropolitan area is 130 million plus. That in itself is the beginning of the problem. Then you need development finance, to finance the project. Again, development finance in Kenya is expensive. The cost of construction in itself, I think it averages, just the hard cost on itself averages from 56,000 to almost 70,000 shillings per square meter. That is expensive, and a good portion of that is because of the imported materials, of course, then susceptible to global economic shocks and the forex that we are currently suffering. So the cost of inputs being the land, being the funding, being the construction cost itself, then renders the final cost of a unit relatively expensive if we are following the right procedure. Obviously, we talked about these mom and pop shops who cut a lot of corners, who then are able to rent, develop at a particular cost or price, and then are able to rent what looks like at an affordable rate. The reality then is whatever product they are availing to the market
There's a compromise.
There's a significant compromise.
Right.
I know you have friends who, if they were to invite you to their places, the best you can do is take an Uber to very close to the neighborhood. You can't drive in there.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of Nairobi. I do have those kind of friends. I have friends all over. That's the reality of it. So I would then say the overall cost of bringing, developing or producing a house is then what speaks to the affordability. What then the beauty of being an institutional developer is, one, you have access to capital. In our case, when we launched this platform, we received a 12 billion shillings commitment from both the financiers, which is to be applied towards affordable housing and mid-market housing. Because of the scale, you are then able to leverage the scale to manage your supply chain in such a way that you reduce your total cost of developing houses to a certain level, to a practical certain level. And for that reason, then we are able to launch to the market the kind of product we have launched on the affordable side. If you look at today, Mi Vida is developing, even within Garden City. Garden City is a high-end master planned development. You do have houses there that, sometimes are being sold for 40 million. Today we have houses selling for between 17 to 27 million on the high-end side. We have mid-market selling for a completed project, selling for about between 8 to 16 million for 1 to 3 bedroom. But in that context, we are bringing an affordable piece to it so that it's a proper mixed income community. And we've introduced houses at price points from 2 million up to 6 million for a studio 1-2. So let's look at that contextually from an affordability perspective. We've introduced an interesting product, which is, I would probably call it a hybrid between a long-term payment plan and a tenant purchase scheme. It's a hybrid. If I buy today that apartment, the studio apartment, at 2.1 million shillings, I pay a 30% deposit over the construction period. Then I register, I take the option of the tenant purchase scheme for 20 years. I will then be paying a monthly installment of about 15,000 shillings post handover, when the unit is handed over to me. If I decide,
for how many years?
For about 20 years. If I decide to rent out that unit, I will be getting a rent of at Garden City rates of roughly, between 15 to 18,000 for the same unit. Meaning, if I get 18,000, I will use 15,000 to pay Mi Vida, and I will keep 3,000, and I will own the unit. So that answers the question then, what are we doing as institutional developers increase access to affordable homes. On the supply side, we are availing capital, we are availing expertise, we are availing the skill. On the demand side, not only are we partnering with mortgage providers in the banking sector, but we internally are launching products which address what has been another constraint in housing provision, and that is mortgages.
Sure.
By giving you a 20-year payment plan that's a hybrid of a tenant purchase scheme.
So you mentioned 2.1 million shillings is the cost of this home. What are we talking about?
It's actually now the price that's going
price
at the market.
At the market rate.
In the market rate, yes.
And this is what, 2-bedroom?
That's
a studio.
It's a studio.
Unit, yes.
All right.
What is a studio?
It's 2.1.
A studio is a more, let me put it in layman's terms, it's a more for more bed sitter, in the simplest of terms. In the sense that it's like a one-room unit. The only thing, it's a self-contained. It has the basic amenities.
It is a one-room unit.
One-room unit.
It's like a hotel room.
It's like a hotel room. It's like a serviced hotel room that has a kitchen. It has, of course, the sanitary facilities and a kitchen and your bed space. Yes.
Okay.
But yeah,
and some space where you can.
And some space where you can put. So it's a high quality. It's not just it's not 4 walls.
It's
a
big.
one room. Yeah, it's big.
So we're saying this comes to 2.1 million shillings.
Yes.
So essentially what you're saying is you pay 30%, which is 700,000 bob.
Over a 24-month period.
As the
unit is being developed,
yes.
You're saying pay this amount in whatever. You pay that over 2 years. And then for the next 20 years, you pay 15,000 shillings essentially in rent. But it will be yours after 20 years.
We hand over, you take possession of the unit.
Okay.
Then if you decide to live there, then my rent is also paying for my ownership.
Yeah.
If you decide to rent it out, it means my tenant is actually paying for me. And because more likely than not, the monthly rent will be higher than that installment, I get some change. So literally, for lack of a better word, it's like a free sort of ownership. You are leveraging. And this is how billionaires build wealth. I'm literally using other people's money to acquire the assets.
Yeah.
And it's a practical example of how I can start building a real estate portfolio in an affordable sort of way.
Okay.
Yes.
And obviously this makes commercial sense for the folks who are putting in the buck for this, because there's something that you make from it. Would this be kind of like the off-plan, I want to call it, idea that then became a menace for many people in this? Would you liken it to the same thing where you bought something off plan, it was finished, and then you went ahead and finished? Would you look at it kind of like the same way?
There is an off plan element because you book the unit. You start purchasing the unit either before we start the actual construction or over the construction period. So it's not a ready unit today. It's either at an early stage of construction or under construction.
Yeah.
So it is off plan to that extent. Then what it does, it gives you multiple payment options. I have what we'd call a standard payment option of 2 years, which is the typical off plan where you pay over the construction period. At construction end, I pay the final installment, the unit is handed over to me, and the title, or the equivalent of a title. We have also availed a 5-year payment plan for somebody who does not want to go the TPS way. The 5-year payment plan just makes it more flexible for more Kenyans to be able to, again, to acquire units. The 20-year plan is also speaking probably to a beginner investor. Because if you think about it, most people fear real estate because they see the capital requirements or the capital investment needed as beyond their reach.
Yeah.
And what we are doing in this product then is demystifying that and saying with only 14,000 shillings or 15,000 shillings, you can actually start your journey towards not just home ownership, but investment in a real asset, if I may put it like that, because that's what it actually is.
Mi Vida involved itself in the buying and selling of land?
No. We only buy land to develop.
All right. So if you buy land, then I take the view that you also pay for the cost of these imported materials and everything that is in it. So, and these are then lumped together and it works to the final cost of whatever unit. Now, according to what we've been told with regards to the social housing that the government is proposing, you get land free. all these burdensome taxes that you would ordinarily pay are waived. And so you build. And when you finish building, the government then reimburses you with a small markup which you will make. Do you think that this government proposal, given the attendant benefits that we have been told exist if somebody partners with them in this project, do you think this is something that many developers like yourself would take up?
My view is the general direction is the right direction. Because recall I started by saying on the supply side, one of the major constraints is access to land. The land in the right locations, because this land for affordable housing, the conundrum there is it has to be close to job centers. In the case of Nairobi, for example, it has to be closer to the CBD or closer to what we'd call the other urban nodes. And the land there is expensive. So it's affordable housing, but because affordability is also measured by not just the cost of the house, but the overall cost of living there, which includes your daily commute. It has to be close to the CBD or close to these commercial centers. So access to land has been a problem. To the extent that the government does hold, either directly or through its institutions, a lot of land in those locations, it makes sense then for the government to avail that land. Is it free? Depends on your definition of free, because the condition for accessing it is there is a price cap on the units that you deliver to the market. So I'm giving you this land or access to this land. I'm giving you all these incentives, but on condition that then when you develop, the idea is to make your cost of production of the houses or cost of development so low to make sense from the price point that the government has fixed. Because the government has fixed the prices at 55,000 Kenya shillings per square meter, which translates to 3 million shillings.
Does it make sense to developers?
The 55,000?
With all the incentives included?
Let me say it's a challenge.
Which means then it doesn't make sense.
Why?
It 50 is a typical cost of developing a house, and it's an apartment high rise.
Yeah.
Is roughly around 60,000, just the actual hard cost. I haven't put in the soft cost in the consultancy.
But the cost, as you told us previously, had to do with the cost of the land, the cost of bringing
to finance,
all these things.
Yes.
Now, the government has removed a huge portion of these burdens. So does that then not relate to reducing the cost of putting up a unit per square meter?
You're right. So let's take the typical example where you say the cost of developing a house is 60,000 shillings. The hard cost, what you call the hard cost, the actual construction, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you remove VAT on that generally, at the 16 or so percent, it reduces that cost to below 50.
Yes.
Below 50,000. If you remove the cost of land per square meter,
Yes.
it means I no longer have a cost of land. The cost of what we call soft cost, the consultancy, the financing, etc., increases that to probably just next to 50,000. So the 55,000 has been a challenge to most developers. And those who have taken that opportunity...
Why is it a challenge? Is it that they're used to higher profit margins? Or
because
is it that they do not...
The most expensive source of capital is equity.
Yes.
If today the bank is lending on an average 15% all in, the equity investor who is taking the higher risk will always ask for that 15 plus a premium. Meaning the minimum return requirement for an equity investor is 20% plus. For it to make sense, for it to be worthy. Otherwise, if my return is 15%, I can as well take that money and buy a government bond. I don't have to take any risk. So for that reason, because of the equity return ask of investors, the 55K per square meter has been seen as a challenge in some quarters.
Is it something that is not negotiable? Can't investors negotiate the government?
I think the government has rightly been very flexible in that definition, and what it has also allowed in when you are in such a site, there is a component within the site that is at market prices, at least in the completed project.
Yes.
That's what I've seen, which allows the investor to recoup.
Yes.
So in one of the developments, for example, not only a certain category of unit at market prices, there is some commercial space allowed within that development, also selling at market price, which then means the blended return from the affordable and these commercial spaces and the market rate, segment, the blended return sort of meets the developers' return requirements.
Then I still see a challenge. Because if you're still going to put up those houses in the market at about 3 million shillings, then they're still beyond reach for many.
Beyond reach from an ownership perspective.
Even from a rental perspective. Because look, a 2.1 million shilling studio, right? If I am to take the TP, it's 15,000 shillings rent to own for the next 20 years. Now, that means that if we just look with the other math that we talked about, I ought to be earning somewhere above 45,000 shillings for me to live in a 15,000 shillings studio. Now, bring a house at 3 million shillings. Rent is going to be much higher. And it's the same. So at 20,000 shillings for that 3 million shillings, it's still going to be beyond reach for very many people. Are we going to be able to be addressing the challenges that we have?
Okay. In fact, I would broaden the challenge to the supply of housing generally and say the government. So the government has 3 bands. People earning up to 20K, that is social housing. Yeah. That the private sector will. The only thing is we can build for the government as a contractor. There is the segment from 20 to 50K. To your point, yes, they cannot afford the 3 million unit, even from a rental perspective. Then you have this other segment called the mortgage gap between 50,000 to 150,000. And you do have a significant segment of workers in that band. Those still under the affordable housing program qualify for affordable houses and they can now afford, we said, up to 30K. Having said that, even above 150,000, we do have a supply issue. Because today if I earn, say, 200K, I probably could comfortably afford a 45K residential unit. The question in the market today is there enough supply of Nyayo estates, for example, for this middle class person to go live in a decent sort of neighborhood and a decent house? Well-planned. The answer is no. So if today you earn the 200 or the 250K, and I can afford the 50K or so in rent, I feel I could afford that, probably I will have to go somewhere on Wayaki all the way to Kikuyu, where I'm seeing units renting up to 55,000 shillings. And there's nothing wrong with the units in themselves, because the units tend to be, they are okay. They are large.
It's everything around it.
It's everything around
access
it.
Road,
Parking ratio, those kind of things. So I can afford to pay 55,000 shillings, but to use the example I used, there is no Nyayo estate currently being developed to give me value for my 55,000 shillings. So we do have a supply issue even in that segment. So I like to think of affordable housing addressing not just these bands defined by the government, but also the next band of what I would call aspirational middle class. This is the accountant working for Spice FM, for example. Where does that accountant live? They qualify to be segmented as an aspirational middle class. Well, I don't pretend to know how much you pay your accountants, but they qualify to be an aspirational middle class.
I am of the view that even this term middle class in this country needs to be
redefine it.
Yeah, most people who qualify to be middle class, in my opinion, are poor people. But anyway,
but they're poor because of all these things. The income is there, but then it's all going into all these other things.
Eric, we have 2 more minutes.
We have a minute.
I'd like you to just opine on this. This much debated finance bill and your industry and how it impacts it.
Okay. So I will answer it from a real estate economics perspective, not the political perspective. A housing fund as a concept is a great concept. It's not new in Kenya. It's already part of the old Housing Act, I think, of 1967. Its operationalization has been pending. We as a country or the industry will never develop unless it's institutionalized through funds. For example, in Mi Vida, the investment is through a fund, private equity fund. So the concept of a fund is important. It will help with offtake. Offtake means it will be buying units from developers and renting them out affordably. So it will control rents.
Yeah.
It will avail a savings plan. You can save and own a home. It will also be a major driver of tenant purchase schemes. So from a concept development, we need it. The only question then is, how is it funded? How it's funded is a political question, and I'm not a politician.
Very nice way of putting it. Samuel, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're most welcome.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation. And yes, it's good to have a conversation with people who have got their skin in the game and they're in there and they're doing things, because then from the perspective that you're giving us is a lived perspective. Samuel Kariuki is the CEO of Mi Vida. Mi Vida Homes, go visit them or talk to them. Go to mividahomes.com, or you can call them 0748 588 488. Ask them about the homes that they're developing off Wayaki Way, at Garden City, and elsewhere. Good morning, 9 a.m.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.